targets of a hate crime more than anyone else. So between California, which encompasses both Los Angeles and San Francisco, and also in Chicago, which is supposed to be the third largest city in America, you have a clear and inarguable proof that black people are the main ones being targeted. This across America. But that apparently fell out of Biden's DHS's assessment. And none of this is new, by the way. Even the white media has been forced to admit for years that black people are and continue to be the #1 targets of hate crime in America. The largest fatality hate crime of this year wasn't that Colorado LGBT bar. It was the Buffalo mass shooting. 10 murder victims, all black. I and just about everybody else in the new black media have been pointing out how Biden was sending a message by leaving us out of that notice. And before any of the trolls and fools try to attempt to say, oh, you're reaching, consider this. White supremacists read between the lines. Remember when Donald Trump made his remarks calling the Charlottesville Nazis sites like the Daily Stormer, who pointed out to their psychotic following that Trump didn't mention any of them and hadn't condemned them. Because at that point, those little white supremacists online going, oh my God, Donald Trump, he's caved in to the woke crowd, he's caved in. It was the Daily Stormer and others who said, no, he didn't. Notice he didn't mention our names and he didn't condemn any of us. The white supremacists correctly discerned that Trump's refusal to condemn them was in fact support. And the opposite is also true. When someone like Biden spells out who it is that they're looking to protect, who they're giving warnings on the behalf of, oh, we just want to let you have a heads up about what's coming. When they decide to leave black people out of that, that's meant for everyone to read between the lines, that Biden and the Democrats are wanting to separate themselves from us, and that it's okay to go in on black people because this White House, this administration, isn't going to do anything about it. Nuri Martinez and her racist pals in the LA city government would be proud. The message is clear. Black people should expect no protection from this government, and as far as Biden and the Democrats are concerned, when black people are attacked, it's a victimless crime. Black people will have to ensure their own safety. We'll continue with this Sunday evening address in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools, because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. Family, we cannot be allowing these insults to just go unanswered and uncalled out. The Orlando nightclub shooting happened in 2016 in the waning days of Obama's administration. Democrats responded to that by immediately holding a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives. After the Mother Emanuel massacre, where 9 black citizens were gunned down at a church, the Democrats responded by having Obama drop by and hum bars of Al Green. That's how they respond to black people being slaughtered in a church. This is worth noting because Biden said he had black people's backs. Yeah, the #1 demo who are the targets of hate crimes in the United States, and Biden deliberately leaves them out of his DHS notice because he's got black people's backs. Actually, what he's done is he's turned his back on us for the last 2 years, just like he had for the previous 50. Starting next year, primary season begins when the Republicans will be trying to decide which Klan leader they want to put on the ballot for president. And when this really kicks into high gear, Democrats will be the first ones to tell you that we have to vote for Biden because the Republicans, they're not going to do anything for black people. Oh, the Republicans, they're going to neglect the black community. Biden's going to protect black people. Meanwhile, Biden's DHS is telling everyone they're not even thinking about us. A government that deliberately ignores the #1 victims of hate crimes in a country, that's a government that wants to perpetuate hate crimes against that particular group. We have to call it out. Part of the new normal for us is to make sure that when people cross us, when they wrong us, we remind them. Make sure that they know we remember. Everyone else loves to remind us of any misstep that a black public figure has ever made, even though those people's faux pas have never harmed anyone. No matter if you call out a Messy Jesse or a Jussie Smollett, doesn't matter. They haven't harmed anyone. But they make sure they mention that to black people, as if every black person is responsible for them. But if black people point out, okay, in that case, it was good for the goose is good for the gander, all of a sudden, you can't be sitting here throwing this in our faces. Yes, we can, because that's what's always done to us. And if it's wrong when it happens to other people, then it's also wrong when it happens to us. Except the difference is nobody ever says that except for us. The white media and other interested parties, they make sure to throw it in our faces whenever a black person has a misstep. Doesn't matter how long ago it was or how minor it was. Well, we actually have legitimate grievances, not over people's words, but over what people have done, over promises that were made and have never been kept. People need to understand we're not forgetting anything, because a people who are worthy of respect remember when they've been wronged. A people who look at themselves as having value understand that it's wrong for them to be mistreated or misused by anyone. As for Biden's DHS warning, don't get shook up, family. This tells us absolutely nothing that we didn't already know, including that Biden's not going to apply the law on black people's behalf. This isn't news at all. It's confirmation of what we already knew, disgusting as it is. So we can be disgusted, but don't be surprised. We're going to see to our own safety and to that of the people around us. And guess what? We can. A lot of us already are. You probably remember that white supremacist Gregory Bush in Jeffersontown, Kentucky. He went to a black church planning to carry out a Dylan Roof-style attack on the black worshipers there, but that church had locked their doors and refused to let that white supremacist in. So that animal went up the road to the local Kroger's because he knew that was a grocery store frequented by black shoppers, and he murdered the first two black people he came across. Now, the white media talks about that, but the part that they don't talk so much about, in fact, the part I can't think any of them mention at all, is that it was a black citizen who opened fire on him when this guy was attempting to leave the scene. And that man was protecting his wife for this murder, just like Kenneth Walker was protecting Breonna Taylor. By the way, that also happened in the state of Kentucky. And it was because of that black citizen who helped to stop the carnage. See, that's the answer to all of these anti-black attacks. We have to be honest about the situation that we're in and take concrete steps to remedy it. Nobody's going to protect us except us. That's what Biden's DHS knows was meant to say. Tell everybody, well, black folks, they're on their own. Okay, that's fine. That's a good thing. The solution to these anti-black race ambushes, no matter who carries them out, is for us to be ready to protect ourselves. Nobody's going to give black people permission to protect themselves, and don't expect a pat on the back when you do. It doesn't matter if you're trying to protect yourself from the Louisville Thug Patrol, or if you're trying to protect yourself from the latest white supremacist irregular soldier who's decided that he's going to open fire on a black crowd. Nobody's going to pat you on the back and say, good job. So stop asking. Biden's administration has sent a very clear message to us. So we're going to have to send an equally clear reply, far louder and far stronger than Biden and the Dems' not so benign neglect. They made it a point to let us know that they weren't going to lift a solitary finger to protect black people. Fine. Then you also don't get to complain about the clapback. Good evening, and be one.
There you go. All right, 2016 Mustang, RTR, Coyote.
Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. I kind of have to brace myself a little bit. Sports is one of those topics that a lot of black folks just don't handle very well. And before the usual suspects get started in the comment section saying, oh God, Professor, do you have to do your usual preamble whenever you get ready to talk about sports? You're doggone right I do. And you know exactly why that is. We start off talking about some athlete who's off code, or a racist team owner, and before you know it, the people in the comments section are speculating about who's going to win the NBA championship this season, or who's going to make it all the way to the Super Bowl. Or did you see how many points LeBron scored? Or did you see so-and-so slam dunk or whatever? I don't give a rip about sports. So it's easy for me to ignore that in general and condemn sports' very existence, but I know a lot of you love sports, and I don't blame you for that. There's a reality there. But at the risk of sounding religious, we as black people must avoid the snares and vices of this white supremacist system. Sports is one of them, because we don't control it. Entertainment, by the way, is another, including the white media's so-called news. Anything that puts our minds to sleep and makes us forget that we're supposed to be taking down these bastions of corrupt power, if not take them over. I say that as a way to hopefully get everyone's minds right before we dive into this morning's briefing. Now, a lot of you have asked me about this one, and a large part of me wanted to ignore it, but since I did a story about Griner this summer, it only seemed right to follow up on it. Brittany Griner spent the better part of a year as Vladimir Putin's unwilling guest. But last week, the U.S. successfully negotiated her release. Now, typically, whenever these prisoner swaps are done, all we hear about is the recently freed captive and how happy they are to be out and what their family thinks, etc., etc. But in this case, the coverage has been a little bit different. What we've been hearing about is that Brittany Griner's been shaking hands with the flight crew, taking her back to the U.S., and expressing her gratitude. We've seen plenty of prisoner swaps and hostages released over the decades. So I'm sure I'm not the only one who thought this was a rather odd thing for the Biden administration to put out there. And of course, the white media is lapping it up. Clearly it's being done to send everyone the signal that this negress, she's very grateful for what the government's done for her. This is basically a way of giving a side door apology for having gotten her out. Oh, look at how grateful she is. Well, she doesn't deserve it. Sure, she doesn't deserve, she's black. She doesn't deserve to ever be out because no black person deserves to be free. But look at how grateful she is. Understand, it was all the black people in the U.S. who were making noise on her behalf that got her released. The LGBT community has not been anywhere near as vocal as they should have been, or as you would have thought they would have been on this one. You still had people like LeBron James, however, talking about Brittany Griner all these months later, keeping her name alive. Now, Brittany Griner has made it a point to fly the flag for the LGBT community, but can you name any of these LGBT activists who are out there putting in the work and keeping up the same energy as the black community was on Brittany's behalf? I hope that Ms. Griner keeps this in mind for future reference. She herself may identify primarily as LGBT, but the LGBT community made it clear that as far as they were concerned, well, she was the wrong color to get priority treatment from them. But I'm also going to reiterate something that I said in my other video about this incident, and that is that there are some black people who simply don't believe white supremacy is global. They simply refuse to believe that the anti-black racism that we have in the U.S. somehow exists in other countries as well. Well, let me tell you something. It does. Sure, the anti-black racism in the U.S. is the harshest that you'll find anywhere on the planet, but it is all over this planet. And the second a black person decides to forget that, oh, these other anti-black races around the world, they'll make you pay for it. Black celebrities already live in a self-imposed bubble where they tell themselves that they're different than the average black person, better, in fact. And the white powers that be will enable and encourage that delusion. White power loves a prank that takes a long time to pay off. This particular prank may have taken a few years to get the payoff, but I'm sure those white supremacists over there in the Kremlin were busy spitting up their vodka, laughing their guts off about this one. Now, there is something else that needs to be mentioned, even if only as a side note. I think we all know it's probably not out of the realm of possibility that Brittany Griner has taken cannabis oil or whatever that stuff was to Russia with her in the past. And they didn't do anything about it before, so she probably figured that meant they knew better than to come at her. After all, she is loosely affiliated with the NBA, which does have influence, so she probably told herself, hey, they wouldn't want the bad publicity of hassling her over some minor contraband, right? Wrong. There's some black people who think that being a little higher profile than most means that these white supremacists will know better than to mess with them. And that's a delusion black people simply cannot afford. Being a higher profile black person simply makes you a higher profile target, not a lower one. Now, from the news reports, the reason that WNBA players go to Russia to play in the first place is because they get 4 to 5 times as much money in Russia as they do in the US. And I guess that's why Brittany Griner was over there, and a number of WNBA players go over there. They're definitely not doing it for the weather. When someone's giving you more money than you make at home, I guess it's easy to forget that this person probably doesn't like you. It's easy to convince yourself of things that aren't true either. Like, for instance, you might start telling yourself that you are hosts in such and such a country. They know that you bring a little bit of pot with you, and, well, they're understanding of that kind of thing because they like you, right? Because after all, the racism is not so bad over there in Moscow as it is, say, in Minneapolis, right? And in Brittany's case, like a lot of black people, we often fall under the illusion that these other countries, They won't take a black person hostage. After all, we're black, we don't have any power or money, so who wants a hostage with no real value, right? And that might be the case if you're talking about a black person in isolation or just your regular black tourist. But in the case of Brittany Griner, she isn't rich, but she does have a high profile, and she comes from a group of people in the U.S. who will make noise on her behalf. And although Brittany Griner may not be the most famous basketball player, she is loosely affiliated with a bunch of the biggest basketball players on the planet who would never hear the end of it if they didn't speak up on her behalf. So it wasn't hard for Putin and his pals to figure out what angle they could play with this one. And I know that a lot of you like to travel, and that's fine. I'm not telling you don't. What I am telling you is please do not go telling yourself that just because some person over there, wherever there may be, makes nice with you when they're standing in front of you, that somehow that means you're friends. As long as it suits their purposes, they may well let you get by with some minor stuff. That is, until they don't. Griner was in Russia to play basketball and nothing else. She also decided to bring cannabis oil with her, and I'm sure she saw it. She's benefiting Russia's economy and culture, and she's the highest profile WNBA player, so why would the Russians want to do something that would alienate and discourage other WNBA players from going there? But as Putin saw it, she was just a bargaining chip, the highest profile American that he could trump up some charges on. And after all, the reason Griner was in Russia was because she couldn't make the kind of money in the U.S. that she was making there. That hasn't changed, by the way. Not for Brittany Griner, not for the rest of the WNBA. So unless the girls decide that they want to switch careers, it is what it is. Russia's the only place that pays them halfway decent. And you better believe they'll eventually rationalize it by saying that, well, the Russians only nabbed her because she had contraband, but none of the rest of them had any real problems, and as long as they keep their noses clean, the Ruskies will leave them be, etc. And they may well be right, but there's no guarantee of it. Some black people are so desperate to escape white supremacy, they refuse to accept that although the harshest and most vicious form of anti-black racism is in the U.S. doesn't have a monopoly on anti-black racism. White supremacy is a disease that has infected the whole world. Leaving the U.S. also means leaving the place where people actually fought for what few rights a black person might enjoy. And worse than that, leaving the U.S. also means you're separated from the very numbers of black people that you would need to speak up on your behalf for a circumstance like this. Some black folks go to these foreign countries and they think that because the racism is a little less severe there, they just become so relieved because to them, they're like, oh man, it's like there's no racism here at all. Because you don't have the heavy-handed, omnipresent racism of the U.S. A lot of black people convince themselves that there's no racism in these other places, or at least it's very minor, and they're wrong. The main reason that they believe this is because most black tourists, and even black business travelers, can't speak the language of the places they visit. And most of them usually stay in the tourist traps. So you better believe that whatever the country's local board of tourism is, they make sure to clean it up. They don't have the real heavy anti-black stuff around there. So when you combine that with the fact that most black folks do not know the language of the people who they're around in these countries, black folks have no idea what these foreigners are saying about them. Keep in mind, when that cab driver that picked you up at the airport, or that souvenir shop owner who was making nice with you, when they get to the United States, all of a sudden they start acting like any other anti-black racist that you've ever met. Doesn't matter if they're from Japan, Russia, Mexico, or wherever. When they get here, they immediately begin acting towards black folks the same way as any other anti-black racist. Something a lot of these traveling black people just don't want to have to admit is that these folks that they were meeting overseas, they didn't become racist when they got to the U.S. The U.S. itself was not what made them racist. That's one of the misconceptions a lot of black people want to hold on to. In most cases, when you look at the cultures of these countries, you see that they've practiced a culture of anti-black racism the entire time. Now, when your only contact with these people is at the souvenir shop, or a taxi driver, or with some tourist guy who's walking you and the rest of your tour group around the downtown area, or some boat trip that you paid for, you can start to think that how they act towards you when you're paying them is how they regarded you the whole time. We try to tell ourselves that, oh, this is friendship, we were friends, when in fact it was just business. Nothing more. Be it in the US or abroad, folks always like to act like they love black people until we say something they don't like, or until they see a chance to use us as pawns in the game. What happened to Brittany Griner has happened to a number of black people. though in many cases we don't hear about what happened to these black victims at all. This is not paranoia that I'm trying to instill you with. It's about being on your P's and Q's and understanding the reality of the world that we live in. Pedro and Dimitri, they didn't become racist when they got to the US. They were already racist back in the old country when you met them at the souvenir shop or met them as a tourist guide or whatever. It's hard enough for black people to visit these foreign countries as is without putting ourselves in a trick bag, which is what Brittany did. But understand the bag was when you stepped off the plane. So let this be a reminder. We have no friends. Not in the US, not anywhere. Brittany Griner just learned a harsh lesson. Maybe. She lost 10 months of her life in the middle of a Russian hellhole, and for what? She went over to Russia just to play some ball. And she found out the hard way that anti-black racism is no game. Good day, and be one.
You don't say the thing in the back.
No, he had to get a new computer.
Oh, that's right.
Is it related to all that?
I wasn't saying nothing. I was a bit